Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving headfirst into an ancient cat-and-mouse thriller that ends with a seriously bizarre, blood-soaked twist of fate. I mean, it plays out exactly like a high-budget Hollywood movie, but the crazy part is, it's completely grounded in historical reality. We're going to look at the final days of the mighty Persian Empire, but not just through the usual lens of massive battlefield formations. Instead, we're looking at an intense, incredibly high-stakes manhunt. 2,000 miles. Think about that for a second. That is the staggering distance our protagonist marched across some absolutely unforgiving terrain just to hunt down his prey. To put that into perspective for you, it's basically like walking from New York all the way to Denver, crossing some of the harshest landscapes on planet Earth. And he was driven purely by this super complex mix of vengeance, politics, and raw military strategy. It was a chase of epic proportions across the ancient world. And, that brings up the wild central irony of our story today. The conqueror basically stepping right into the role of the avenger. Think about it. Alexander the Great marched into Asia to systematically conquer and destroy the Persian Empire. That was the whole point. But as you're going to see, he actually finishes his campaign by avenging the very king he initially set out to defeat. So, how exactly does a massive shift like that happen? Let's get into it. All right, let's start with Section 1, the king and the traitor. Okay, so to really grasp this manhunt, we first have to understand the epic collapse that triggered the whole thing. Setting the stage in the ruins of Persian authority, we can track the rapid, honestly tragic deterioration of Darius III. He's the last great king of Persia. After taking a crushing defeat at Gaugamela in 331 BCE, he retreats to the mountain city of Ecbatana. But guys, his authority is completely in ruins. His army is just totally scattered. He makes a desperate attempt to flee toward the Caspian Gates, but ultimately, he is seized by his own men. His generals essentially just stop taking his calls. Now, a quick bit of context here to understand this betrayal. We need to look at the role of a satrap, which is essentially a provincial governor in the ancient Persian Empire. Among Darius's failing ranks was a satrap named Bessus. He governed Bactria, which was this distant province way out on the empire's eastern edge. Bessus watched the king's power completely evaporate and, well, rather than go down with the ship, he decided to plot his own ruthless rise to the top. Inside that retreating Persian column, Bessus and two other satraps make their big move. They ambush Darius, and get this, they actually bind him in golden chains. It's this incredibly deliberate cruelty, right? It's meant to preserve the visual appearance of royalty while literally stripping the guy of absolutely everything else. They drag their royal prisoner eastward through the mountains, turning a living god-king into a mere bargaining chip for a bunch of ambitious governors. Which brings us to Section 2, the desperate night chase. Meanwhile, Alexander the Great is closing in rapidly. He is absolutely determined to capture Darius alive before anyone else can get their hands on him. Stripped down for pure speed, Alexander's cavalry rode an unbelievable 50 miles through the dark of night on completely exhausted horses. Just think about the sheer physical stamina required to pull that off. Alexander knew that Darius was fleeing and that Bessus had hijacked the convoy. So the Macedonians pushed their animals and their own bodies to the absolute brink, desperately hoping to intercept them. But tragically, they arrived just moments too late. A cornered, panicked Bessus had Darius stabbed and just tossed him in a wagon by the side of the road. When Alexander's men finally reached that wagon, the king's body was literally still warm. The ultimate prize, the guy Alexander had chased across entire continents, was snatched away at the very last second by a desperate traitor just trying to outrun the cavalry. Moving on to Section 3, the usurper's brief reign. So, the true king is dead. Suddenly, the power dynamic wildly shifts, and the whole chessboard completely resets. Bessus doesn't just run away. He actively claims the throne for himself. He declares himself king, taking the incredibly bold royal title of Artaxerxes V. He then retreats back to his home turf, the frontier province of Bactria. Bessus foolishly believed that those distant, rugged mountains would keep him perfectly safe from Alexander's wrath. He really thought the hostile geography alone was his ultimate shield. Spoiler alert, he was incredibly wrong. Here we go into Section 4, March through the mountains. Alexander pushes his army across terrain that very few Greeks had ever even seen, let alone crossed, initiating a grueling, deadly pursuit. The environmental toll here was absolute devastation. Bessus is burning bridges and crops to buy himself time. We're talking about Alexander's army marching through the Hindu Kush mountains in the dead of winter, fording the flooded freezing Oxus River, crossing literal deserts without water for days on end. It got so unimaginably brutal that soldiers were reduced to eating their own pack animals raw, and some men simply froze to death in their sleep. But Alexander, he absolutely refused to stop.
And now for our final act, Section 5, Betrayal and Persian Justice.
All that immense pressure Alexander is applying finally cracks the usurper's inner circle. Because, let's be real, loyalty among usurpers rarely lasts. Spidomenes, who was one of Bessus's own top officers, suddenly realizes this self-proclaimed king is a massive liability. The Greeks are completely relentless, the countryside is burning, and Spidomenes does the math. He decides that handing Bessus over is worth significantly more than protecting him. When you build your new throne on betrayal, you really shouldn't be shocked when your subordinates learn from your example, right? Talk about a staggering reversal of fortune. Oh, how the mighty fall. In the spring of 329 BC, Spidomenes and his men violently turn on Bessus. He finds himself entirely stripped of his fancy royal clothing, locked in a wooden collar like a common animal, and simply dumped beside the road for Alexander's advance guard to find. It is a stunning, almost identical echo of exactly how Bessus had treated Darius just a few months prior. Karma, right? But Alexander doesn't just execute him on the spot. No, he utilizes traditional Persian custom to exact a highly specific, honestly horrifyingly brutal punishment on the usurper back in Ecbatana. He strictly follows the steps under Achaemenid law for regicide. Step 1, he ensures a formal trial before a Persian court, giving the whole thing political legitimacy. Step 2, Bessus has his nose and ears cut off, which was the traditional permanent mark of a traitor. And finally, step 3, brace yourself for this, the execution. His body is literally tied to 2 bent trees, and when the ropes are cut, he is violently torn apart. And this beautifully, brutally contrasts Alexander's calculated political moves. On one hand, look at his treatment of Darius III. He's given a king's funeral and sent back to Persepolis with full royal honors. On the other hand, you have Bessus, publicly mutilated and torn apart by trees. Alexander is honoring his true rival as a legitimate predecessor while violently obliterating the traitor. It's a total masterclass in political messaging for all of his newly conquered subjects to see. And after all the immense bloodshed, the extreme weather, the backstabbing, and the suffering just to grasp at power, 2 years. Bessus got to wear his stolen crown for less than 2 measly years. It really is a profound historical reminder of how incredibly fleeting ill-gotten power truly is. So I'll leave you to ponder one final question. Did Alexander hunt Bessus for justice, like he publicly claimed, or was it simply to eliminate the absolute last political threat to his brand new throne? Was it a matter of ancient honor, or was it entirely calculated, cold-blooded pragmatism? I want you to really think about Alexander's true psychological motivations behind this relentless manhunt. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and as always, keep asking questions.